Howdy, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with today's co-host, David Leffler. How's it going, David?
Doing great, Joe. Excited to be the host of the day with you here.
Yeah,
Let's do this.
yeah. So we have some interesting things going on. There's an election that's about to happen. There's been some folks filing for office, but there was one very unexpected turn that we we could not have seen coming. Apparently, Big Bird is challenging Ted Cruz um, for Senate, and yeah, he's brought the whole gang with him. It looks like we've got Cookie Monster as his campaign manager, and Elmo as a senior advisor, and Bert as a communications director. So unclear what Ernie's role is, but it looks like the team is growing here.
First of all, just have to say, I've been looking for a candidate that can both appeal to the youth vote and the furry vote, and I feel like we've really got this in Big Bird. But yeah, I mean, I think you can't just leave it with that, Joe. Can you explain to people what exactly the hell we're talking about here?
So, folks might have seen that Big Bird got the vaccine and he was, doing what he can to protect his flock naturally. We all love Big Bird. And, he was hanging out with his friends. He went to Mexico because, he was vaccinated, so he could do that. And so Sesame Street and the gang have been, trying to teach kids now that the vaccine is available for kids that it's safe, it's effective, and it keeps everyone else safe if they go ahead and get it. And then Ted Cruz saw Big Bird tweeting about this and said that this was government propaganda for your 5-year-old. And I think that was, Big Bird had heard enough. And so he decided to launch a campaign to take out Ted Cruz. His inaugural tweet says, "Unlike Ted Cruz, I won't fly away to Cancun when Texas is in trouble."
Ooh.
Tough words. Yeah.
I
So
mean, what we're I understand that Ted Cruz has long, accepted the fact that he's a slimy individual that no one, even within his own party, likes. But um, you didn't know if there was another lower level to reach after trying to flee to Cancun during the freeze earlier this year. But if you're going after Big Bird, you're not going to win any political points. You're certainly not going to win any points on social media. I mean, I've long given up any kind of aspirations of understanding what goes through his head. Um, but it's incredible to see him getting owned by Big Bird of all people.
yeah, it's really great, man. Yeah, Sesame Street obviously it's been mostly untouchable for the past few decades, and Ted Cruz has managed to make just about everything political. And so, it falls in line with what we're seeing over the last few months of Republicans making everything that kids do now very political, from sports to what they read in their libraries to what they're taught in the classroom. And it just seems like they've run out of, all they went through all the adults and all the alphabet LGBTQ, and now they're to children, and it's like the latest target. And so, and here we find ourselves, Sesame Street.
I mean, I to a sense I can understand where Ted is coming from. He is envious that Big Bird got a chance to go to Mexico unperturbed without getting hated on by anyone. I can understand based on his experience. But yeah, then it kind of lends you to think like, and this is a theme we'll certainly get into it later in this conversation, but with these conservative movements of saying we're going to go start our own thing. What is the parlor version that will soon be birthed of Sesame Street? I'm honestly curious. It's definitely going to be somewhere suburban. You know, I don't know, just you not only certain things that were previously thought to be sacred, as you were saying, no longer. But it's again, there's no benefit to attacking Big Bird. There's no benefit of attacking Sesame Street here.
Yeah, I really don't see any. I think that's, it's what a lot of us grew up with, and it just shows just how sad I really think he is, and I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's pretty.
There's nothing else to say.
No, but following this campaign is pretty interesting, and it's pretty funny because Big Bird for Senate, his Senate Twitter handle has already got almost 60,000 followers, and then his campaign team is right there behind him, and so Cookie Monster, Elmo, and Bird, and all them are all very active on Twitter now, thanks to Ted Cruz. So if anything else, um, like you said, he's maybe the youths will start to pay attention.
I mean, I understand that obviously, as we've seen, even just from the recent, elections out in places like Virginia, conservatives Republicans have done a very good job of weaponizing children and education and over the idea of history and quote unquote critical race theory. So I understand why there's this audacity to continue that movement into something like Sesame Street. But I think, as we're seeing with this, there's just not, there's certain limitations to those kind of things. And I think it does speak to, all humor aside, a dangerous thing that, you have politicians who are openly attacking, stuffed animals for trying to get, them to encourage kids to get vaccinated because vaccines are now available to young children.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, at what point is the bottom, or at what point does this stop, or do they ever get to a point where their own side says, okay, no, this is too far? And so far we haven't seen that. We thought maybe, hell, we thought when Trump first announced and some of the things he said, and then we thought after he was elected some of the things he said, and then we thought January 6th maybe that had to be it,
right?
They literally attacked our Capitol, and it keeps going and going and going, and now we're seeing Governor Abbott send letters to the school boards, telling them they need to go through and start making lists of all the books that are in their libraries. And it's so, yeah, I mean, so naturally, PBS, it's a channel that kids watch, and so it's really kind of the obvious next step, I guess, is, and there's no political agenda for Sesame Street. They're literally just teaching kids about what's going on, and they're trying to find ways to talk to them about real life things that are happening, and it just doesn't fit their narrative. And so,
and the thing that's scary, right, is that whenever you have a public broadcast channel that they've, over the years, from what I understand, public broadcasting has received less and less government funding, but when you have, they still receive some, and when you have, even the prospect of the idea that could be kind of, this could be a preview of an effort to try to cut out funding, or to silence channels and other outlets that are trying to provide basic information to kids. Again, it's all funny until it can get a little more serious and and that's not hyperbolic at all, because as you've seen again with these races nationwide, the idea of fear mongering parents into political gain is not anything new, and it's certainly something that isn't going to go away for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, and we see this new poll that just came out, and we're looking at the popularity amongst certain elected officials in Texas, and Ted Cruz, interestingly, is is outperforming John Cornyn. For when Beto ran, he ran partially on the idea that everybody hates Ted Cruz, and so he would be the easiest person to run against. Not easy, but he might have the best chance of winning. And right now Ted Cruz sits at 45% approval with 44 disapproval. So that basically means he's universally known, but not necessarily as universally disliked as we would like to see. And interestingly, he's much more popular than John Cornyn, John Cornyn's approval sits at 29% with 44% on disapproving. So the same level of disapproval with significantly less actual approval. And that kind of falls in line with, I guess, our view of what's happening with partisanship broadly, right? Texas has been mostly, in terms of the voters, a conservative state. And so the fact that Ted Cruz is consistently throwing out this type of red meat, even if it's at Big Bird, is apparently what they like to see. And so John Cornyn slinking into the background, maybe not wanting to engage at certain levels. He likes really petty things. So he's not above really petty stuff. It's very clear, but he kind of stays out of the forefront of these cultural conversations. And so it's interesting to see that he remains equally unpopular, and yet on the conservative side, significantly less popular. I guess because he's not seen as being out there,
Right.
as much as Ted Cruz is.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to a lot of which a lot of Republicans are having to navigate, is they're kind of unless they really go all out, with the fringe, they're kind of damned.
Yeah,
That's obviously how it's showing up in a lot of policy in states like Texas. And speaking of, I know you're just talking about some of those polls. There were some other pretty significant polls that just came out, conducted between the University of Texas at Austin and the Texas Tribune. Joe, did you get a chance to look over those?
yeah. I'm actually got it pulled up now. I was looking here. Greg Abbott sits at 48 disapproval and 43 approve, so he's upside down, which is never good for an incumbent governor who's literally been statewide elected official for, I don't know, almost 2 decades now,
Yeah.
between his time on the Supreme Court and then Attorney General, and then now governor. And so it's not good to be upside down. And then when you look at the issues, man, people are not happy with the way the state handled, as they shouldn't be. But that's kind of one of those things where we can all be partisan on all these theoretical things, but when the lights go out, somebody's at fault. And so it does seem like at least Texans are able to sort of direct that towards the right accountable parties. The only question is, A, can we get a candidate to
Right.
channel that? And then B, how well can they actually channel that? And can they take that, form a real narrative that sticks to him as the leader who we need to replace?
Right. And whether or not this kind of understandable frustration among Texans will will it subsist, or will it kind of dissipate away slowly, as these things can kind of have ebbs and flows. Just adding to what you were saying, within that, they said that asked people how things were going in Texas, and 48% said we were on the wrong track, and only 40% said we were on the right track. And so, I realize that a lot of that probably falls along partisan lines, but that also shows that only 4 out of 10 people believe that that the administration that's leading the state is doing a good job of that. And so I think this only affirms a lot of things that you and I have talked about, and a lot of people are seeing in Texas. Or it's the 3 special sessions and the regular session. Was just a constant reminder of the red meat that has been prioritized by the Texas legislature, instead of fixing the myriad of critical problems that our state is facing, right? Creating more problems rather than fixing those that we have. And so in many ways, yeah, this just speaks to things that we had long suspected, but seeing it in numbers like this it's pretty jarring, and it's affirming that people are paying attention more than I think maybe they traditionally would, just because these problems that are hampering Texas, the grid, lack of access to healthcare, lack of a pandemic, anything approached from the government when it comes to schools, vaccines. These are things that are surrounding people constantly. So it's good to know that people are paying attention to that, and it's hopeful that, as you said, should we get a candidate, that there will be plenty of fodder for them to be able to run on here.
Yeah, exactly. And there are other, we are now in that window where folks are filing, and so we should expect some surprises. And so, other than Big Bird as a surprise, one of the other ones that popped up today was everybody's favorite crazy uncle, Louie Gohmert.
My man.
God. Man, I knew this guy was dumb, and I know that's not a nice thing to say, but I do reserve it for people like Louie Gohmert. But this guy is really the worst of the worst. If there is a bad take, he's on it. If there is some really toxic narrative that's forming nationally, he is going to be in front. So whether that's vaccines or masks or overturning the election, this guy's right there. So I find it very interesting that this long-term congressman from East Texas, who wins his elections with 70% of the vote,
Oh yeah.
no competition whatsoever, wants to enter the race against Ken Paxton, Attorney General, statewide office, when Ken Paxton already has the support of Donald Trump. And the only thing he can run on, the only thing Louie Gohmert can run on, and I've read his website, his sort of exploratory website, which you can go to gohmert.net.
.net.
Gohmert.net. You can go there and read all about why he wants to challenge Attorney General Ken Paxton. And he says, we need an attorney general whose top attorneys working for him have not found it necessary to send a letter to the FBI urging an investigation into the corruption of their boss. Now,
that's quite the mouthful.
I mean, yeah, exactly. First of all, that's a lot of words. Second of all, Louie Gohmert is one of the top people who spent the last few years talking about how corrupt the FBI is. And so now we're supposed to think that the FBI, after listening to this narrative for 2 years, that's who's going to switch. Like, we were for Ken Paxton because he was helping Trump, but now that the FBI is looking into him, we need Louie Gohmert now. I just don't feel like it's a consistent enough narrative, and it makes me wonder what's really going on here.
What do you think? Do you think this is, my first thought I went to this, which is, obviously it's unfounded, but do you think that this is at least placing a bet on the idea that, Paxton could actually, some of his debts will come due when it comes to all these indictments he's facing?
The only thing I can assume is a couple of things. One is that they think that he might go down. He might actually get in some trouble. And this is a crowded field already, right? So it's not like nobody's challenging him. So Gohmert thinks this is my chance. There are 3 other relatively big names who are challenging Attorney General Ken Paxton. You have Matt Krause, who's a sitting state representative who gave up his seat to challenge Ken Paxton. You have Eva Guzman, who is a current Supreme Court justice of the state of Texas.
Yep.
And then you have George P. Bush, who is land commissioner, current elected statewide official. These people are all giving up, their elected positions to challenge Ken Paxton. And then the poll that we just referenced, they have Ken Paxton in this poll, and he is actually, ironically, still leading the pack of all these folks with 48% of the vote. 48%. And then George P. Bush, 16%. So this is obviously a poll amongst Republicans because this is for the primary. Right. George P. Bush is sitting at 16%. And of course, that's probably going to be your business Republicans, Republicans who are embarrassed by Trump and the thing that Trump are doing, even though George P. Bush was simping for Trump just as hard as anybody else. Right?
Oh, yeah.
He did everything he could. He even had, he threw his own family under the bus. He had those koozies made that it was a Trump quote, "The Bush I like," or "My Bush," or something to that effect.
So embarrassing,
so cringe. And so you have George P. Bush at 16%, Matt Krause, the state representative, at 3%, Eva Guzman, the only qualified candidate in this entire race for them, sitting at 2%. And then someone else, is that Louie Gohmert, at 3%. No opinion at 27%. So Louie Gohmert's going to do everything he can for that 3%. He's going hard in the paint for that 3%.
So how does it make you feel to see so many of these, Republicans crowding into this field giving up their current positions to pursue this. I mean, if nothing else, regardless of who we get, a lot
Yeah,
of people are getting purged from the
exactly.
Texas government.
I mean, it's the silver lining for Democrats. Ironically, the only way apparently we can get rid of Republicans in Texas as a Democrat is to have them run against each other in a primary, which is sad, but that does seem to be the case here. But yeah, I say let's pack as many of these clowns into one car as we can, and see what happens. And
There's a Texas Signal Squid Game themed meme out here of this.
yes,
There's got to be.
that's a great idea. Yeah, we should definitely do that. We'll red light, green light these fools.
Louie Gohmert, for anyone who's watching it, Louie Gohmert is player number one, the very old man.
Oh yeah.
There's serious questions here, then there's not so serious. So it's louiegohmert.net. Do you think he has a Hotmail account, or what is he working
I
with
mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's like Alta Vista or something.
All emails sent over MailChimp.
Yeah, it's total yikes. I mean, and it's not even, yeah, it's just Gohmert.net. I mean, that's what you're working with here. Um, Tyler PO Box if you want to check in there. So he says, give all you can today. Everything you can give. With this, you may be. I'll say this. What this reminds me of is there was an East Texas congressman many years ago at this point, who his name was Steve Stockman. I don't know if you remember him, but he ran. He's he's a Louie Gohmert. He's on par with Louie Gohmert, except he did some illegal things with his campaign funds, and as sort of a last ditch move, he ended up running for some higher office. I think could have been president or like governor or something, like where everybody was like, "Well, he's crazy if he does that." And it turned out the reason he did that. Oh yes, he was going to run against John Cornyn. So this was like 4 years ago or more. He was going to run against John Cornyn. I guess it would have been 6 years ago because John Cornyn won re-election in 2020. So this would have been back in 2014. And so everybody thought he was crazy for wanting to do this, and it turned out he basically knew that he was going to be giving up his congressional seat because he done something illegal and he was going to be found guilty. And so this was sort of his way of sort of gracefully, in a way, getting out by claiming he was running for some other office and getting crushed and then disappearing into the sunset, right? And because a lot of the times when these elected officials at that level, Congress or whatever, get in trouble, and this may be the case with Kim Paxton, they are offered a deal, and part of the deal is you step down or you retire or you don't run for re-election, and then they get lesser penalties. And so I could see in a world where Louie Gohmert knows he's maybe going to get in trouble with something with January 6th and is now saying he's going to run for this office, but it's just literally to get him out of federal office and he has no intention of actually winning, but it's his way of going down with a fight, and not just literally being like shooed away and dragged out.
Right. I mean, regardless of whether they're out at him or out at Paxton, the knives are out, right? I mean, it's clear.
Yes, and that's my theory. So that's my theory of why a long-term, member of Congress who is at no threat of losing his seat would actually give up his seat. So
right.
We'll see.
I mean, he's got a ton of great campaign slogans kind of built in, like I helped storm the U.S. Capitol. Now let me storm the Texas Capitol. Things like that. There's an opportunity to weave in his insurrectionist accolades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. He's based in Tyler, Texas. So for whatever that's worth, I'm born in Southeast Texas, but that's deep East Texas, as we say, behind the pine curtain. I'm
curious, when we're talking about statewide races, for what it's worth, I had seen just recently that former U.S. Senate candidate MJ Hagar threw her support behind Matt Dowd for lieutenant governor. I was going to see what your thoughts were there.
That's interesting. I don't know. My guess is it might have something to do with um well, did it? I don't even. She ran in 2020. She ran against Cornyn, so yeah, I don't know. She probably philosophically aligns pretty well with him. I would imagine she was,
Yeah.
a sort of a middle of the road Democrat, not a particularly left or progressive Democrat. So then again, it could be something personal she has against Mike Collier. I actually don't have a lot of insight
Right.
into that, but it's one of those two. I don't think that her name probably carries a ton of weight. But she did win her primary. And so if you're looking for every vote possible, and I bet she has a ginormous email list that
Oh
she
yeah.
can send that email out and just, put Matthew Dowd's name in a lot of people's inboxes, and then potentially raise some money from Texas, which is what he probably really needs. And if you'll remember, she was backed by Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
And so she's probably has a decent national pool of money. And we expect Matt Dowd probably does as well, being, former Bush guy. And I think ultimately at some point, part of the Lincoln Project crew of basically never Trumpers turned Democrat. And so, yeah, I think it's just name ID and probably a little bit of cash. Never
So
hurts.
so how does give me your honest reaction. How does a McConaughey Dowd headlining of the Democratic ticket sound to get have sound you, Joe?
Man, I haven't heard anything about McConaughey in a while, but
I haven't either.
I'm willing to try anything at this point, quite honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get bored of losing the same way over and over again. Let's try something different. Let's lose a different way. Maybe we learn something new. Who knows?
Joe, you don't like moral victories?
Moral victories don't pay a lot of bills, unfortunately.
And I, in the vein of elections, obviously, something you and I were talking about just earlier was that there just was news came out about the influx of registered voters in Texas.
Mhm.
According to just reading an article by Jeremy Wallace of the Houston Chronicle, Texas has topped 17 million voter registrations ahead of the 2022 elections. For context, in 26, that's 2 million more than there were in 2016, and almost 4 million, 3.5 million more than in 2014. And just a quick breakdown, some of the biggest counties that have benefited from this influx, or where that influx has come from, not too surprising, Harris County with over 500,000 new voters, Bexar County with 276,000, Tarrant with over 250,000, and then both Travis and Dallas counties with over 220,000. And so I'm curious to get your take on that and what it means as we get closer and closer to 2022.
I mean, yeah, that's 10 times more basically almost than what Beto lost by. So that's a good thing. I think we have to caution Democrats. I think we certainly learned this in 2020 that just because more people vote doesn't mean they're Democrats. And
Right.
we've fooled ourselves with that over the last couple of cycles, believing that to be true. And so I really think that, and I certainly hope that we start to see a little bit more attention paid to the partisanship of the folks who are registering to vote, even
Right.
though it's almost been taboo to really talk like that and say that, because Democrats have, because we believe so much that as long as more people vote, Democrats are going to win. We've always just said we want everybody to vote. We go out and we'll register anybody to vote because we just
Right.
naturally assumed if you're a Republican, you're registered to vote and you're going to vote. So if you're not registered to vote and you're not voting, you're probably a Democrat. And that just turns out to literally not be true. And so I think that we've got to be really careful. It's good that we have 2 million more people now to up for grabs, so to speak. But we do have to speak to them, figure out who they are, and make sure that we're focusing on people who will actually turn out and vote for our candidates. Because if you look at all the graphs, one of the most popular graphs every cycle when we lose is a pie chart that shows here's all the people that voted for Republicans, here's the people who voted for Democrats, and then the rest is here are the
No
people who
one.
registered who didn't vote for anyone.
Yeah.
So we already have millions of people who are registered to vote who don't vote. So 2 million more people to add to that. Now we have 9 million people or whatever who are registered but haven't voted, is just 2 million more people for us to sort of to find the right people, the right few hundred thousand people that we need to actually go and turn out the vote. And we just got to be smarter about that. So that's what I'm hoping that that Democrats will learn a lesson from the last couple cycles and really do that. So
yeah, no, I think it's a great point, is that obviously there's only one party in America that gets really excited whenever there's high voter registration numbers or actively encourages democracy. But there's a difference between being happy that there's a lot of new registrants and assuming that makes this a foregone conclusion, or that it necessarily even benefits us. Because as you mentioned, of course, in 2020, the massive turnout among Republicans, and even more recently, right, in Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin won that state because he received 500,000 more votes than the previous candidate, the previous Republican, the last cycle. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point to point out that, this is not, the indicator that we once thought it was. And also, in the background of all of this is, it's impossible to really predict this, but how many of these people who are registered could be impacted by the new Texas voting rights legislation that is designed to strip away people's voices, even if they have everything kind of lined up on their end.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, and what else can Republicans say after this election if they lose or whatever, because they're certainly not intending to. But how can they complain about election fraud and things like that after passing all these types of bills? But we also saw that Trump won by hundreds of thousands of votes and still wanted a full audit of the whole state. So.
Right.
So I don't think that we can probably ever think that we've hit the bottom, and we just have to do what we need to do, to get our folks to turn out, and we're always going to have to be creative and work within whatever the rule changes that they make, because they're going to continue to make it harder, and we just got to be more creative. And finding ways to turn folks out.
Right. And just an important thing to note is that as we've been talking, right, we're now less than a year away from Election Day in 2022. Obviously, we still do not have a Democratic candidate. But, I'm sure you've been hearing the same things. I've been hearing that, as I have for months, I guess at this point, that an announcement from Beto should be coming anytime now. Obviously, at this point, we're in the full phase of I'll believe it when I see it. But a date to circle on everyone's calendars is that if he is going to announce, he has to do so by December 13th.
Yeah, we have a date that a drop dead. There's a drop dead date, and so we know that's the case. And I've seen some stuff floating around on social media that he has some announcement or something coming soon, asking people to go ahead and sign up, and you'll be the first to hear. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. We're all waiting, and it'll be fun. But there certainly is, a gaping hole at the top of our candidate list there. And so as folks join and start to fill into some of these slots, there is that one at the very top that we all kind of anxiously are hoping to get filled, so that we can go out and start getting Greg Abbott to spend a little bit more of that money. Now he's already spent, it seems like, a couple $1 million hitting Beto already, right? We know that. And then he's got his primary folks that he'll probably spend a few more million there. But we also know that he can just make a couple of phone calls and raise $1 million at a time from individuals. who made billions of dollars off the storm that he never did anything to fix.
Right.
And so he probably feels like there's a few people that owe him, a few $1,000,000. And that's chump change compared to what they made. So why not?
Right. And I get that we've been talking about this in circles for months now, but the bottom line is that, whether you're talking about that race on the Republican side, for attorney general, whether you're talking about, a potential and impending declaration from Beto O'Rourke, and then you add in the poll numbers that reflect a larger sentiment about frustration about how things are going in Texas. The odds are stacked against us. They are, from a legal perspective, in terms of all of the bills that were just recently passed by the Texas legislature. They are from a political sense. Obviously, this is Texas, but if there's ever cause for excitement among people who may not normally be engaged, or are having trouble feeling excited after these first several months of the Biden administration, bottom line is that Texas, should Beto eventually announce, will have its most noteworthy, most exciting, most certainly most fundable in terms of access to money candidate with the highest name ID, going against Abbott at the weakest he's been since he's been atop.
Oh, it'll be the most money Democrats have spent in a governor's race since Tony Sanchez, and that was in the 90s when he spent $80 million of his own money. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because we certainly know that Beto can raise tens of millions of dollars, and he'll have to, but he will be able to. So we'll, sort of keep our fingers crossed that is something, like you said, we've been talking about, that will actually come to fruition in the next couple of weeks. We should see. So, yeah, well, the last couple of things on this list.
Yeah, I think we gotta go. I think we gotta go. The University of Austin. Joe, have you heard the news?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've become a magnet somehow for these right-wing weirdos all over the country. It's keep Austin weird. That's not what we meant, but now it's just like this. There's this hot magnet, thanks to, I don't know, Joe Rogan, Elon Musk. I don't know.
So for people who have not been paying attention to this, first of all, I envy you because you've saved a lot of brain space. But on Monday, the 8th, a collection of right-wing, quote unquote journalists and thinkers and faux intellectuals announced that they were starting the University of Austin, and leading this group was Barry Weiss. She's, was a long time opinion writer and editor at the Wall Street Journal, then the New York Times. And I didn't realize she lived in Austin, but as you're saying, she certainly represents the continued exodus of right-wing personalities with a megaphone to Austin, with obviously Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. They're greeting Alex Jones here, but they announced that they were starting this new university called the University of Austin, with the explicit purpose of pushing back against the quote unquote woke movement and leftists that apparently have consumed academia. And they announced this over a letter penned on Weiss's Substack. And beyond just even announcing that they were starting this, to push back against quote unquote wokeism. It's important also to note that they do not have a campus. They are not an accredited university at this point. They
don't offer degrees.
They don't offer degrees. And it's just, it would be hilarious, and it is hilarious, but it's also just speaks to this ongoing trend that seems to be happening in Austin in terms of the folks who feel like that they have a megaphone and therefore want to kind of project and blare out this kind of propagandish thought process on as many people as they can.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see Louie Gohmert as a tenured professor in the next couple of years there. But yeah, this is definitely this right-wing grift. A lot of people are comparing it to Trump University because because they're basically anti-intellectuals. They're gonna go there to literally undo any type of um, you know any type of professional education and that folks have been receiving across the country. They're there to literally undo that, and that's basically their stated goal, and it's really stupid. And it seems like a bunch of Silicon Valley dum-dums are going to be putting a bunch of money into this, and who knows where it's going to go. But
and for if anyone wants to look at their FAQs on their website are gold in and of itself. First of all, they say so their acronym, the University of Austin, so they call themselves UATX, and it says the U is for university. ATX is a popular configuration for Austin, Texas. I've seen, specifically about that point, tweets out there with the GIF of Steve Buscemi saying, "Hello, fellow kids." Like that alone just sounds so clunky and strange, and shows that they're not, from here or know this place very well.
Yeah.
Whenever they ask why Austin, the first thing it says is, if it's good enough for Elon Musk or Joe Rogan, it's good enough for us.
Gross.
So gross. And I just love this. Do you offer degrees? We do not confer degrees at the moment.
So what is it you say you do?
You do here.
Yeah, exactly. Now that movie was filmed in Austin, and they belong here, but I don't know about these other fools. But yeah, it's to be continued. We'll see what happens with these MAGA morons, but yeah, they love Austin, man. That's the thing about it. They absolutely love it. And a friend of mine had a tweet the other day, and it was really perfect. I could probably get to it really quick and see what it was he said exactly. But he said,
Sure.
why is Austin such a magnet for conservative dipshits from East and West Coast? Simple, because they want to live in the conservative dream of Texas without actually having to deal with actual conservatives in Texas. I mean,
Right.
it's exactly the point. And so, yeah, they're not moving to Lubbock. They're not moving to Tyler. They're not moving to Woodville or whatever. They're moving to Austin because it's awesome. People want to live here. It's hip. It's cool. It's nice. And it's a bunch of, and all they're going to do is complain about the people we elect to run this place, to make it and keep it the place that's been so attractive.
It's the perfect scenario for someone who wants to enjoy the bounties of living in a liberal place with creativity and acceptance, and also wanting to play the victim at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It is the perfect place for that. And as you mentioned, this is part of a larger trend, and something that we don't expect to be slowing down anytime soon, but also definitely something to monitor and continue talking about. Because from a cultural aspect and from a political aspect of what this will do to the city and the state, it's definitely something that is incredibly interesting, and we'll certainly have more developments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then obviously this is something that I'm sure plenty of people have heard about, and so we won't have to spend too much time on it, but would be remiss if we didn't touch on everything that happened in Houston this past week at Astroworld. I believe the net count is 8 people have died, and pretty much all of them are very young people in their early 20s or teenagers. Died whenever there was a rush of the crowd to get closer to the stage. And yeah, it's an absolute travesty. It's definitely, I mean, there's not a lot to say about it other than that. And that it's just, I know they're still trying to sort through what exactly happened, who to hold responsible. There's investigations been open, but Joe, what was your first reaction when you were reading about it?
Well, that he's dodged a couple bullets previously. Travis Scott has,
right.
He's been arrested twice before for essentially inciting crowds to ignore security. And so you would think that, knowing that in advance, the organizer of this festival, which is Live Nation, who also owns ACL and basically every large concert, and I think they own Lollapalooza as well. And the fact is, he was arrested at Lollapalooza, so they know who he is, and they know what he's capable of, and they should have had better security and in a control of what was going on there. They were understaffed. The people who were staffing were not professionals. So apparently, even the quote unquote medical help or staff weren't really medical professionals, and so they were woefully understaffed. It was not a controlled environment. It just makes you realize like this was just about money, and they wanted to make as much money without spending as much, putting it together as possible. And I've seen a lot of people on TikTok and Instagram making fun of Travis Scott's apology because it's very clear that he was paying to have to do it and not paying because of what happened. That was a takeaway that I had by watching his apology on TikTok or whatever. And saying that he had no idea, and then Kylie Jenner saying she had no idea, but then you see videos online and you see the ambulance literally right under him, and him just continuing to do what he's doing while people are yelling, "Stop the show! Stop the show! Stop the show!" And so there was nobody who was in charge, who was making the right decisions, and I don't think any of these families, any of them, you could start to see the accountability catch up with him a little bit because he's now having to refund everybody's money. He's talking about setting up a fund for victims. Now, none of those victims should have to pay a single dime for anything that's happened. There are already lawsuits. So my hope is that beyond this particular event, I hope that there's some level of accountability and we don't see what happened to him, what happened to R. Kelly, because remember what R. Kelly, like, we knew all this stuff for years, and still, even after hearing about the tapes and the court proceedings, people still played his records. They still wanted to see him live, and so there's really, like, you see that kind of a thing and you're like, there's no accountability whatsoever for these entertainers.
I think it's but I think a lot of what you're saying is definitely true. I think something that a lot of people have overlooked, and this is largely because the way it's been covered by the media, is that Live Nation also has a long history of workplace and festival violations, right? They've been subject to a number of lawsuits, and I think at least from a narrative perspective, I feel like they've been kind of let off the hook to some degree, right? I mean, I'm just looking through an article by NPR right now, and it's like in 2011, they had a stage collapse in Indiana, and there were 7 people were killed and 61 were injured.
Oh, geez.
They had to pay out $50 million for that.
Wow.
A concert staffer in 2013 suffered a brain injury after a forklift tipped over the booth he'd been working in, and he was awarded $100 million. Another time in 2018.
How are they not broke, man? These concerts are.
Well, I'll get to that. In 2018, a Live Nation employee was hit in the head by a 6-foot steel metal post that tipped over and was sent to the hospital. So they have a long history of workplace violations and suffering from some of the lawsuits. But when you're talking about money, just its last quarter, Joe, Live Nation reported a revenue of $2.7 billion. So
there you go.
They're taking the path that so many of these companies are, in that, safety be damned, workplace safety or well-being of the people who are here be damned. Let's turn out as much money as we can. Let's overpack these spaces, and that'll help us pay for more than just the lawsuits, right? That's how we make our bread, and that's the answer.
Exactly. And that's why these lawsuits payouts have to be punitive. That's the key.
Exactly.
They have to be punitive, because if they're not punitive, and that's, people wonder, well, why is it so much? You don't need $100 million to get hit in the head. Well, it's because hopefully the next guy won't get hit in the head, because they'll care a little bit more. They'll hire the right consultants to build this and spend the money on the front end instead of the back end. But to be determined. Of course, we'll keep an eye on this as it unfolds, and see if there's any real accountability for him. But and for everybody, like you said, it's not just Travis Scott, but it's all the people who enabled this situation to unfold. And it was just a tragedy all around. And people were going there to have a good time, and they it was on the first day, so it was at least a 2-day festival.
Yeah.
So we'll
Yeah.
see, but a lot more to come on this, and then of course everything else that's going on with elections over the next couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll get even more surprises than Louie Gohmert and Big Bird. But so keep it locked in at texassignal.com and following us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram and TikTok, and everywhere else. And anywhere you get these podcasts, we definitely appreciate it. That's all I got, David.
What about the Patreon, Joe?
The Patreon, yes. TexasSignal.com, in the top right, become a Patreon member, and essentially you're helping to support this type of progressive journalism because we so desperately need it in the state of Texas, and we appreciate so much all of our Patreon members. Thank you so much, and we look forward to any new ones that care to join. So thank you very much. Alrighty, y'all. Well, I guess that's it for this round.
Thanks, Joe.
Till next time. Later, y'all.